Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Royal Drawing School's series of creative conversations. Tonight, we're really delighted to be hosting a conversation between Amal Khalaf, who's Director of Programs at Cubitt and Civic Curator at the Serpentine Galleries, Ulrich Obrist, who is Artistic Director at the Serpentine Galleries, and Rory Pilgrim, who is a multidisciplinary artist working with songwriting, film, music, video, drawing, and live performance. They're going to be discussing Rory's current commission with the Serpentine Galleries as part of the Radio Ballads programme based in Barking and Dagenham. And I'm really pleased that you're all able to join us this evening, particularly as the UK begins another lockdown, which of course sadly involves the closure of museums and the Serpentine Galleries. And I think we're all in vital need of restoring our creative communities and collaborations at this time. And of course, we're on the eve of the US elections too. So it seems a really pertinent time to be thinking about Rory Pilgrim's image that he brings to us as part of his current project, that the symbol of the raft and the idea of the raft as an ultimate, the ultimate preserver of life. And that's the kind of starting point for the second chapter from a body of performance film and sonic work exploring climate crisis. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about this. And I'm going to hand over straight away now to Ulrich, who's going to introduce our speakers and the project in greater detail. So thanks very much for joining us, all of you.
Thank you very much, Claudia, and thanks everyone at the Royal Drawing School, and thank you all for joining us tonight. Special thanks go to our Director of Communication, Rose Dempsey at the Serpentine, who always talks about the Royal Drawing School and was really instrumental in organizing these talks. So thanks so much to Rose. And of course, Amal, Rory, and I are delighted tonight to talk about the Radio Ballads, but also about the practice really of Rory and the drawings in Rory's practice. And really the point of departure was that more or less at the same time when the invitation came from the Royal Drawing School to do a talk, a conversation with artists about drawing, we were in Barking and Dagenham with Amal and actually visiting Rory's studio in Barking and Dagenham. And it's an unforgettable experience for me because we actually saw Rory's notebooks, which were full with extraordinary drawings. And that's really when this idea was born, how wonderful it would be to do a talk focusing on Rory's practice and drawing. So it's my great pleasure to introduce a little bit more the Radio Ballads, and of course to introduce the practice of Rory and the practice of Amal. Rory is a British artist based in the Netherlands and also the UK, and Rory is working in a wide range of media. The practice comprises songwriting, composing, music, film, music video, text, drawing, and also live performance. Centered on emancipatory concerns, Rory aims to challenge the nature of how we come together, how we speak, listen, and strive for social change through sharing and exploring personal experience and also wider political questions. Strongly influenced by the origins of activist, feminist, and socially engaged art, Rory works with others through different methods of dialogue, collaboration, and workshops, something which, of course, comes all together also in the project in Barking Dagenham. Rory often composes music as a way to bring people together and explore how we use it to challenge, to celebrate, and voice ourselves. And we are in conversation tonight with Rory and Amal Khalaf. Amal is curator and artist, currently director of programs at Cubitt, and of course, civic curator at the Serpentine Galleries. Amal and I have collaborated ever since 2009, actually, for more than 11 years now. It all began with the Edgware Road Project. Amal has also commissioned and developed residencies, exhibitions, workshops, collaborative research project. Of course, the pioneering work with the Implicated Theatre has to be mentioned from 2011 to 2019, where actually theatre of the oppressed methodologies are used to develop interventions. And Amal is, of course, also a member and protagonist of the artist collective GCC, Consortium Commissions Curator for Montreal, as well as a trustee for no.w.here, and also on the artistic committee for Arts Catalyst. So tonight we're gonna discuss foremost and above all, of course, the Radio Ballads, which are our Serpentine project. It's a project which has a lot to do with our idea of slower programming. We believe that we as an art institution need to go beyond the time frame of events, of this idea of event culture. Exhibitions last a couple of months. We're interested in long durational formats, and it's interesting because it actually is deeply connected to a very wonderful book, a book by Roman Krajanic. It's called The Good Ancestor, How to Think Long-Term in a Short-Term World. And it, of course, connects also to our environmental work with Back to Earth, where we've invited for our 50th anniversary, 50 artists to do 50 campaigns for the 21st century. So in a way, trying to liberate society from this short-termism, as Roman Krajanic says. And there are many different ways how that can happen. As he writes in The Good Answers, they can happen through deep time humility, through legacy mindset, through focus on intergenerational justice, cathedral thinking, holistic forecasting, and last but not least, also ideas of a transcendental goal. But tonight we're going to less talk about Back to Earth. That could be another conversation we could do at some point as part 2, but tonight the focus is on the Radio Ballads, a very long durational project, which actually marks the anniversary of the 1970 Equal Pay Act and the momentum for change created by the Dagenham Ford sewing machinist strike of 1968. 1968 is also the year I was born, because Amal wanted to talk later on also about astrology. So I was born on May the 21st in 1968. Amal wanted me to give you the information on my astrological sign. So I'm a Gemini and Libra, but more about astrology later. Back to the Radio Ballads. So it's the Dagenham Ford sewing machinist strike of 1968. This project starts there. It's a collaboration of the Serpentine with the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham. And we're working on collaborative artist residencies and commissions that actually examine the future and histories of work. And these Radio Ballads are very much part of the New Town Culture, a pioneering program of artistic and also cultural activity taking place in adult and children's social care across the entire borough. So it's a cultural impact award-winning project. It's part of the London Borough of Culture. It's a Mayor of London initiative, and the New Town Culture responds to the really incredible stories, knowledge and skills of the residents of Barking Dagenham. So it has a lot to do also with what Etel Adnan, our friend, the poet and artist, always says when she says how important it is in the 21st century to listen. And listening is a very, very important part of these Radio Ballads. Amal, you will tell us more.
I was muted. But yeah, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and for sharing your astrology. And so maybe we should also do that, Rory, before we move on to discuss the Radio Ballads. I am a Cancerian sun with Capricorn rising. I'm born in July 15th. How about you, Rory?
I'm born 14th of March, and I'm a Pisces, but with a Capricorn moon and rising, I think.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Hans Ulrich, you share a birthday with my mother. She's also 21st of May.
Wow.
Wow. Lots of different energies here. But I wonder, maybe just to start, Rory, before we talk about the Radio Ballads, again, a bit more in detail, I wonder if you wanted to start us off with just a bit of a warm-up. Rory and I and the rest of the Civic Projects team, which include Lizzie Graham and Leila Gattens, we've been running about 40, 50 workshops now, like on, online and away from the keyboard, as Legacy Russell says, but we have been doing loads of workshops together. And at the beginning of every workshop, there's a little ceremony that we do. And it's often a little exercise led by Rory. So I'm just gonna hand over to Rory to start this evening off with an exercise.
Okay, well, Amal and Hans Ulrich, do you both have a piece of paper to hand?
Yes.
And maybe anyone who's listening at home, I know I think my friend Carol is listening, Robin. You can just get a blank piece of paper, and I think it's quite important that it's blank in some way, but of course this paper has some origin. Mine is from the Rawari Hotel Berlin, where I am actually calling from. And just look at this blank piece of paper, almost like a sea or a shape in itself. And I'm just going to give us each a minute to create almost just like an automatic drawing of whatever, like, it's been quite a day historically, but I mean, we've all had our different days, but just use the paper as a whole kind of world in a way, just to create an automatic drawing. And it might be that you use one part of the paper more than the rest. It might be very small. Just let's see what we come up with in a minute. So I'll give us to, let's say, 2018 or around 2017. Okay, 10 more seconds. Okay, so when you're ready, if you feel comfortable, just to share, and we'll just see what we've drawn to light, what's come. So maybe Amal, would you feel comfortable sharing?
Can you see that?
Oh, wow. Amazing. Okay, well, maybe we'll just see and then talk. So Hans Ulrich, do you mind sharing?
Oh,
It's complicated because of my backdrop. I think it's difficult to see it.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a green screen.
Oh, it nearly came.
It came. Maybe bring it down.
Maybe in front of your... Oh, you've disappeared. Oh, there.
Oh. Wow. I can see it's like a grid.
Wow. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, and mine is... So, yeah, maybe Amal, maybe you just talk us through what you think, what came to your page.
I think I've been thinking, I just feel like, all these talks that we're doing, over the last 6 months, it's just every time I always want to remember, and I think that we're doing it now in a day like today, just all of the crises that are happening at the same time. And yeah, I just kind of, I think I was just thinking about all the people that are constantly on my mind, and I was like actually creating some kind of talisman related to the election, but I think related to the crises in general. And so there's like an image of like putting energy out and lots of people. And for some reason I drew a tower, but I don't know why. I drew it looked like the Kuwait towers. Anyway.
Amazing. I love the hands with the like power. Yeah. Amazing. Thank you. And Hans Ulrich, how about you? What's on your page?
Yeah, it's sort of translated very strangely with the backdrop because it looked like a grid, but it's actually much more automatic writing than a grid. It's kind of inspired by Barbara Chase Ribot, the extraordinary artist who has this practice of automatic writing. And I was always very inspired, when I saw her do it. And I'm still not really good at it, but the idea is to just somehow enter this mode of automatic writing, yeah.
I love that.
And what are some of the words in it?
Yeah, it began before it entered the automatic mode. I used the Deleuzian thing, au lieu de ou au lieu de ni, both and instead of either or, instead of no, and then from there the flow evolved.
Oh, amazing.
And you, Miu?
I think mine's very just like very often like I mean we're just opposite of what's going on in the world right now, but I'm also I think thinking a lot just about these. I've spent the whole day also doing a workshop with 8 people and thinking about like these screens that we're in, these windows, like I've often been thinking of them as windows, but what are they as doorways? So like these thresholds, but like what is this middle thing? Is it the talking? Is it the like this sort of feeling that we're both kind of walking towards? But I don't know. I've just been thinking a lot about these situations also, like with this talk, like what it is to be through the door and what's beyond the door. Yeah, and like, but we're always crossing thresholds, I think, in some way. So that was a word which came.
I love it.
So thank you very much for sharing, because I suppose for me it was like the best way to start also just about like my relationship with drawing, and that so much for it myself as a sort of activity, or I wish I did it every day, but it's not quite a daily practice, but it is just this space to kind of just bring things to light or draw things to what you're feeling. And yeah, and so however technological we are in this world, that this act of just drawing on the page is just eternally there as a tool that we have.
Yeah, I love that. I love this idea of drawing something to light. And I imagine that if we were in a workshop with everybody that's on this call, we would have all shared our drawings and then collectively have produced something. We would have visioned something together individually, but then collectively. And I wanted to read this quote, which was something that we 3 were talking about when we just had a chat a few days ago. And I thought it would be nice to share this now. And it's a quote by Mia Mingus, who's a disability justice and transformative justice activist and writer. And this is a quote from Carceral Capitalism by Jackie Wang. And it's from a section called The Politics of Dreaming. And it says, "We're building a reality that we have never seen before. we're asking people to flex their visioning and dreaming skills, something that is not readily supported in our society. And I think we were all really intrigued by that energy of that quote. And I think it would be nice to leave it in this ether right now at this moment, and just to think about what spaces do we have to collectively dream, and actually that it's actually quite urgent for us to be thinking about and creating spaces for that. And I would say that maybe that's a way, and thanks Hans-Ulrich for the beautiful description of all of the work we've been doing together collectively for over a decade. And the way that I really think about these collaborative projects with artists and different groups and activists and people all over London now for the last decade is how do we create these spaces to collectively dream and collectively practice the futures we long for, and those futures be those of change, of justice, of love, of possibility and friendship, rather than focusing and centering so much on the broken structures and the struggles that we're working within. I mean, that's always been part of it, but how do we also create spaces in these workshops and these multi-year projects to really develop trust and thinking and dreaming together? And I think, Rory, we're so lucky that we get to work with you, because there aren't that many artists that can hold people through this process, I think. It's just such a privilege to get to work with you. And as Hans-Ulrich says now, we've been working together for over a year in Barking and Dagenham. And the project, the Radio Ballads project, is actually inspired by radio documentaries that were broadcast in the 50s and 60s that Hans-Ulrich mentioned. And the thing that really captured our imagination, why we named the project Radio Ballads, was that it was the first time that working class voices and other voices that never were centered previously were broadcast on the BBC. So this was radical in the 50s and 60s. But we were really thinking about this idea of collective voice, and actually what does it mean to collectively think together and produce a story that tells us something about this moment from the perspective of those with lived experiences of maybe the most intense parts of the most difficult parts of these changes that we're going through in the world today. And so Rafts is the title of Rory's project. And I think we'll talk about that a bit more later on with the images that you're going to share with us, Rory. But we've been working with two groups. One of them is Green Shoes Arts in Dagenham, and the other is Project Wellbeing, which is a space in Boise, Idaho. So we've actually been developing this connected space across borders and oceans. And we've been able to do this by doing workshops online and really thinking about interdependence, interconnectedness, and what are the structures that hold us? Like, what are our rafts, but also what are the other structures that are supposed to be holding us as we're experiencing all the eco-grief and social crises that we're experiencing now. But yeah, I think something that, we do social practice may be the loose term to describe a lot of the things we do in these projects. But I guess we were really interested to speak with you, Rory, more about all of the different ways that you do work, and maybe to go back to your sketchbooks.
Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe from here, I'll start showing some images.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to do a share screen, which I hope is smooth. So can everyone see something?
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, also thanks for the invitation for speaking. For me, it's also a completely new context to be speaking within a drawing, the Royal Drawing School, and to speak explicitly about my relationship with drawing, because I think for someone like myself, I do work within within the framework of a lot of social practice, and working with others is is a huge core to what I do. But I think for myself to be able to do that, I have to have this quite secure grounding or space in which I can personally do that from. So before I even collaborate or engage with others, that I have a space for myself to support that. And I suppose the main thing for me that has always been my sketchbooks. So I think I have over about 50 or 55. I'm in the process of actually kind of slowly going through them for a book next year. But the sketchbook is where a lot of these things or this grounding for myself comes. And yeah, I think this was the first, the page which Hans Ulrich saw when I was at spending time at the White House, because I don't live in London. I was very kindly hosted by the White House, who are our community space in Barking and Dagenham, so that I could get to know people in the area. And this page just is, it's kind of like not a generic page, but it kind of brings together kind of three elements in which I use my sketchbooks. And one is to draw, one is to write music, and then the other is to lyric write. And for me, my most kind of natural forms of just creating are through that. And I think, like, while I'm working with people, that to be able to do that, I'm also building a series of images and I suppose feelings as well, to kind of ground that, because when you're working with people or over a long time, over about 2 years, sometimes you kind of wonder actually what you're holding from that. So for me, the sketchbook kind of, I'm able to quantify that work. So this also just happens to be a page from where it's got one of our Zoom calls from Dagenham, with the group from Barking and Dagenham and one from Boise. So I also kind of document that work. But it's also where I come to maybe also vent. Like, here's a page which says, I don't have many words at the moment. They seem to have all just gone, vanished. And then I suppose I'm also, like, I call them anchors for myself, but like, even when I'm working over a period of a year or two, I try and ground it in a metaphor or an image. So actually I've actually noticed through going through the sketchbooks, there's this recurrence often of like two things almost touching but not. So this was an image of like two boats. I think at the time I was thinking about this phrase, two ships in the night. So what it means to like be so like aware that something is there, but you just glide past it. I always wanted to do a work where you'd like actually on the ships, but yeah. And this is actually a drawing out of a sketchbook, but this is a really old drawing from 2008, which was maybe my first attempt at a social, like socially engaged project, but it was like how to bring two completely disconnected towns who had no need to connect, but I created I think it was quite a big website where it gave that possibility, but without any of the towns being directly involved. It was kind of a project of de-authorization. But yeah, this is called The Binding, or in Estonian, Ühendus. And then I suppose another space is just like things I've heard from others. This is a comment which came from one of our workshops with the Project Wellbeing Group, which is a day group for people at the Interfaith Sanctuary, a homeless shelter in Boise, Idaho, when we're talking about like where do we actually get to connect with people. And I remember like hearing this guy at the back of the room who was quite shy saying that the only space at the moment he feels he's connecting to people is in his dreams. And I just like afterwards, I just knew I had to document that in some way.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, more lyrics. Sometimes there's references from other things. This happens to be Brandy and Monica, The Boy's Mine. Trying to think how I could possibly write as good a song as that. Yeah, and then I suppose the drawing is a form of just thinking about voice, who is speaking and who is not speaking, or what happens when a voice is gone. I think that informs a lot of my work over the last 12, 14 years. And I thought I would actually share two main projects as a way of just showing how the sketchbooks kind of also work towards like maybe a performative event or something which is completely different to maybe what is where like drawing is seen. And I'm also fascinated myself at like artists, how they actually construct performances. And this is a work I made for the Stedelijk Museum in 2012. And it was quite an overwhelming commission where I was invited to choreograph the opening ceremony for the Stedelijk, which is the sort of modern art museum of the Netherlands. And but there was this added pressure, let's say, that the Queen of the Netherlands was going to be part of the performance, and also that it would be broadcast live on TV. And it was this quite overwhelming situation where I was mediating between these different parties and their different agendas, the museum, the television, and the Royal House. And as an exercise of what literally could be spoken without censorship, but just what a platform that could be, but it feeling so precarious. And the image which kept reoccurring was it felt like that the building was this cliff, this cliff in which it was facing an ocean or some kind of form of thing touching it, but also kind of this motion of kind of pulling it forward and backwards. And
it's very beautiful to see these drawings because, of course, your practice being largely framed in social practice, it's very rare that you actually show your sketchbook. And we thought that's why this is so special, that actually for the first time in a way in the talk tonight, you give insight in all these sketchbooks. Now, one of the things which I thought was very fascinating when we spoke with Amal and you in Barking and Dagenham is that we sort of talked about the notebooks and then about some of these big projects you're actually doing for which you do these sketches, like the Stedelijk. You told us about that very momentous occasion, which at the same time had to do with control, but it was also uncontrollable. And you told us that the larger it gets, in a way, the more fragile it gets. And of course, these large projects address also the big topics of our time. And I know that at the actually at the drawing school, we were told by Claudia that actually the focus has been a lot on ecology, drawing on ecology. And you, of course, mentioned already the project in Boise, Idaho, and that has a lot to do with the environment, the idea of youth climate activists from Boise and small towns from the surrounding area, where you addressed the overwhelming global issue really of climate change, of extinction, and of course, addressing such big themes, we can only address them in a way when we go beyond the fear of pooling knowledge. You know, it has to do with breaking down also silos of knowledge, of separation, and that leads us to something which I think is very, very central in your practice, which is this interdisciplinarity. And it was actually fascinating the other day to find out that your neighbor in Holland is someone I've known for 20 years, Laureen Wyers. And, initially I wanted to ask you in terms of this interdisciplinarity, quoting Kepes, because of course, Georgi Kepes said, we need to go beyond the fear of pooling knowledge. But we can also think about Laureen Wyers and the way how Laureen actually, since the 70s, has brought together art, science, economy, spirituality. She organized amazing gatherings in the 80s and 90s, bringing together the Dalai Lama with visual artists from basically Lawrence Wiener to Marina Abramovic, but also physicists and scientists and economists, and created these interdisciplinary encounters. And it was fascinating to find out that she's your neighbor, because in a way, that's very much also part of your work. And I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about this interdisciplinarity in projects like the Undercurrent, but also the Resounding Bell, but of course also the project in Barking and Dagenham. All these projects are they break down silos in a way.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's coming back to my drawing, like this question of the door. I mean, when we draw, even automatically, like it's so much grounded in what's already in our bodies or in our minds or our experiences. And I think Laureen is I often refer to her as my guiding star, and is a mentor as well. And I think, I mean, Laureen as an artist, for Laureen Byers, she spent a good 20 years also just trying to make 5 days happen. Right. It also coincidentally took place at the Stedelijk. But like, and maybe that coming back to that question, I think I have it in a sketchbook written, but like the larger something gets, the more fragile it equally becomes. And I think about Laureen's practice also, that she spent these 20 years, she called it, of trying to follow the arrow of the time. And for her, it was just essential to bring the voices together of art, scientists, spirituality, and economists together. And I think, yeah, I maybe not so kind of also focused on those, let's say, parameters of the different humanities or kind of global blocks which form our human lives, but just what it means to bring people together and the complexity of that. And I think that's what we are always dealing with, especially from a social practice point of view. So in a lot of the projects, and I think since meeting Laureen and also having mentors myself, just trying to understand the importance of just intergenerational dialogue. And I think that has just become more urgent as like we see historical events unfold over the last decade, but that's always been there. I mean, even if you look back to revolutions through history, or Tiananmen Square in China, where it was this polarity between student-led organization movements and then a party of elders who had also created some form of revolution and not being able to join that together. So I'm often thinking about what the rupture is of where that takes place, and like Laureen, where 20 years amalgamated in 5 days. As artists, I think we're often confronted with that, like in creating an event, or or just not knowing where it's going. But I suppose also for you, Hans Ulrich, you hearing from the voices of others is so essential to what you do, and listening. I wonder how you relate to this idea of a mentor, or hearing the voices from others from across a generational spectrum.
Yeah, I think it's a very important point you bring up, the idea of the intergenerational dialogue, because you kind of took it from interdisciplinarity to a more intergenerational dialogue. And it's something actually Grace Lee Boggs, the activist who is so important, often talks about that we need to find an intergenerational kind of nexus or dialogue. And for me, it's always been very important. I mean, for example, Etel Adnan, I was thinking before a lot about Etel Adnan, the poet and writer who is now in her mid-90s, Paris-based. when you ask me what were the words, I began with the automatic writing. I often begin with her quote, "The world needs togetherness, not separation, love, not suspicion, a common future, not isolation," which is this wonderful thing she wrote for my Instagram. And it was kind of the beginning of, and of course I was thinking of that Instagram also when you made us, doodle at the beginning, all of us who participate today. And because of course, in a way, that for me, this whole Instagram idea that I post notes and doodles and handwritten sentences, as the one I just read from Adele, all began with Adele, because we sat in a cafe and it was raining and we couldn't continue our walk, so we spent several hours in a conversation. And then at a certain moment, after 2 or 3 hours of talking, Adele took out a little notebook and started to write the poem. And I just thought it was so beautiful how she hand wrote this poem, and I took a picture, and that was the beginning really of my Instagram. Ever since, whenever I meet with artists, or poets, or they would write a sentence, or and then we will post it on Instagram. And it has, of course, also to do with, again, the question also of extinction, because it's not only species which disappear, but also actually, as Edouard Glissant always said, cultural phenomena can disappear. And in a way, Adele felt also that, this idea of handwriting might actually be somehow endangered. So we have to celebrate it. So that really led to this project. So yeah, the answer is it's very important. I learned so much from someone like Adele. I visit her every month. She's a mentor. As Edouard Glissant, was a mentor to me. And I read Edouard Glissant every morning for 15 minutes. Yeah.
I loved hearing both of you talk. There's like a lot of tenderness, but there's something that's like embodied about the way that you're talking about your relationships to mentors and these different generations, which I think connects to this idea that we're talking about, that we're talking about through Back to Earth and through the urgency of now, like connecting to 7 generations, which is something that you've spoken about too, Rory. It's like so much part of your work, and it's evidence in like the way that we can convene groups and things like that. But I was thinking about this idea of ceremony as you were both speaking, just kind of these rituals. I think that the practice, that handwriting practice on Instagram for you, Hans-Ulrich, becomes a type of ritual or a ceremony or a way to connect, not just with the 2 people, like you and the other person that you're doing the exchange with, but then it starts to share with a wider group of people. And you were just about to show us something related to ceremony, Rory, and I was thinking a lot about, I wanted to ask you maybe what your relationship to ceremony or ritual is, maybe in terms of connecting generations, or maybe just connecting people in general.
Yeah, I don't know, ceremony is like, I think maybe it's also quite fun, like in the context of a lot of the work that me and Amal have been doing, where we also host it's a very private space that we work in, a very intimate space of arriving at a space in which people are working through things, that they're very generous but also vulnerable with what they share, and working in the framework where something becomes public, that is always a ceremony in some way. And I think as kind of both our practices, it's like, how do you provide a space of care for that to happen and be supported? So I think for me, ceremony is a lot about that kind of holding something into a public space in which that thing is declared or spoken, and I suppose, not also devaluing or underestimating the moment of a speech act. We hear it in workshops itself, but it's another thing then for it to be shared. And I think that's how I relate to ceremony a lot of the time.
I was actually thinking, Rory, in terms of what you just said about ceremony and in terms of also what you, Amal, just said, I was thinking of Alexis Pauline Gumbs and one of my favorite authors and his extraordinary trilogy, a poetic trilogy, and actually the concluding volume in that trilogy is Dub, Finding Ceremony, and it takes inspiration from Sylvia Wynter, from dub poetry, and also from ocean life. And as a book basically gives us a catalog of possibilities to remember, to heal, to listen, to live otherwise. That it's like prose poems. And what is so beautiful is that it's not about this idea of influence. You see, so it's not like Alexis Pauline Gumbs saying I was influenced by Sylvia Wynter, but it's about Alexis Pauline Gumbs thinking with Sylvia Wynter. And I think that's a very nice way of describing, I think, you know, what Rory said about what you said about Laureen. You know, it's thinking with Laureen. And I wanted to ask Amal, who are the people you are thinking with in terms of this transgenerational dialogue?
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful, I'm so happy you brought Alexis Pauline Gumbs up, because I was thinking, like, part of that question of ceremony was, like, I was just listening to Apprentice Hempel podcast with Alexis Pauline Gumbs, where she speaks to ceremony and like thinking about holding hands with and thinking with, thinking alongside. And I think a lot about, I've been thinking about why it is that I have this urgency to always be working with others. And I think of a few people. There are lots of guides. Most of them are living. I mean, you mentioned Grace Lee Boggs, and of course there's incredible Adrienne Ree Brown, and like who has translated lots of Octavia Butler's texts into like political guides for navigating the change and moving towards the future. But I would say, like, I definitely have a mentor that's still with me, maybe in the ether, but it's my grandmother, who was a traditional lamenter. So she was a lamenter in her community. Her job was to lament and hold grief circles with people. And I was talking about my work and why I do collective work recently. And I've been thinking about her a lot, because I feel like in a lot of the workshops that we're holding together, Rory, and anything that's going on, not just this year, but in the last decade that we've been working together, Hans Ulrich, we've seen like so many rugs pulled out under of so many people I work with. And I feel like grief has been part of this work. I think there's grief work there. And so I would name her as one of my intergenerational, she's now passed to the other side, but I would like to name her in this space, because somehow I'm connecting some of the actions in my work right now to that. But yeah, obviously, like there's a lot of amazing people. We've already mentioned like Grace Lee Boggs, and you know, that question of what time is it on the clock of the world is something I think about all the time. But yeah, I think those are who I'll call in.
And Rory, you said you wanted to talk about maybe one or two projects more into depth. So maybe we could look at one or two of these larger projects.
Yeah, maybe I'll just give a little clip of the project from the Stedelijk, and
that
then
would be super nice. Yeah,
and then I'll share a bit more of Rafts and the body of work that's part of. But yeah, for this this particular ceremony, I at that time I felt like the most urgent thing I could do was work with teenagers. I think after 2010, with changes in government, and we were seeing a lot of right-wing governments come into power, firstly in Europe, just what that meant to young people, and the changes in education. And as someone who also had just crossed that threshold of going into their 20s, I also kind of felt maybe also a responsibility to use the platforms that I had. But yeah, this in this performance, I worked with 8 teenagers, and we had this conversation about what we wanted to say, what could be said in this position where we knew that like over 1,000 people were going to be present, but also essentially addressing the nation, but knowing that we had to be like the royal house wanted to see the speeches and the information, but I was very quite determined that they weren't going to see anything until the day, so they couldn't change it. So it really was a moment of free speech. And three of the teenagers very bravely gave speeches as part of the anthem. And I kind of saw them as these 3 fires giving out smoke. But this particular speech I'm going to play comes from a teenager called Romena. And she, the first speech was about like, how do you know when you're yourself? That was by Jana. The second speech was by Gina, and she talked about the importance of having a space to openly work through fear. And she thanked all of the women who had also stood up against the male patriarchy of the Stedelijk Museum. And then the third one is Romena, and it's in Dutch, but she kind of, there's English subtitles which you can hopefully see, but she speaks about like trying to just express a feeling of where we're going right now at that time, and is it possible to bring people together? And she kind of says, it feels like we've got all these ideals from the past, but what are they doing? Is it possible to work with them or not? So this is just a little clip.
Hallo, ik ben Romane en ik ben een blikopener bij het stedelijk. Zal alles om mij heen veranderen of verander ik? Want als ik vooruit kijk, dan zie ik zoveel richtingen en zoveel mensen. Ik hoop dat deze mensen zullen vechten voor verandering, zolang ze maar niet de dingen die ons lief zijn kapot maken. Maar is er iets om te veranderen? Ik hoop dat er verandering komt. We hebben allemaal genoeg ideeën en idealen. Ik hoop dat er niks verandert aan het feit dat we met elkaar verbonden zijn. En dat we daarvoor de juiste manier vinden. Maar als we allemaal samenkomen, dan hoop ik dat we een groep worden van allemaal verschillende mensen. En niet een groep zijn van allemaal dezelfde mensen. Want je bent al verbonden met iemand als je diegene accepteert zoals hij is. My question for the future is everything okay now?
Yeah, so it goes on, and the Queen actually unveils a banner with the words from the anthem. But it felt very precarious even to be able to ask a question like that. Is everything okay now? In front of a head of state which can't be politically vocal. And that question also, however general it may sound, is so specific. And it almost kind of, as that performance goes on, it's kind of, it's also so stuck in the moment of like, is everything okay now? And I think for me, in those years of 2012, when we saw so much of dismantling of social services and things across Europe, it was at that moment where we weren't quite able to, some things almost weren't graspable as well, but looking back at them, it's so kind of to see what it has led to, but to still be able to ask this question of what do we hope to become. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Just, I feel like that's the first time I've seen that, the performance with speech. I think I've usually just see the sung part in really short clips, and I haven't seen it as a whole. And I mean, so much of your work really is you know, you're speaking to these incredible, you're intervening in moments of violence, like extreme violence with people, but creating spaces where it can be maybe processed or represented or thought through again or holding hands with. And I wanted to ask you about words and language, and there's so much of your work kind of contains words and statements, not just in the things that we hear and the things that you say, that others say. Oh, is that my internet? Can you hear that?
I can hear you now again. Yeah, that was just a momentary glitch, but I think now it's good.
Maybe I'm glitching.
It's saying my internet is unstable or something. I'm just going to stop screen sharing. Hello.
Hi, am I back?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I guess I wanted to ask you a bit about language and words and how they play a role in your work, because I feel like it's not just in those discursive moments, it's also in voice, it's in songwriting, it's in beautiful posters of statements and language. I just wanted to, just to maybe ask you a bit about those connections and how
I think maybe I don't want to misquote, but I remember Laureen telling me, Laureen Byers, that we live so much, like as humans, we're bound by this, that we have language. I mean, I personally am of the belief of others, that to think that we are the only ones who have, as species, have language is a very arrogant position. But I think so much of our words are our kind of gateway to make things happen, and how to deal with their fragility and possibility. I mean, often we think that actions speak louder than words, but what happens if we don't have the words to create the right actions? And I think so much of what, I mean, maybe I come also from a Quaker perspective, but like in a non-violence movements, I mean, words can be violent, and I myself have had stutters and things like that. So I think for me, words, it's like this love-hate relationship. Like, how much does a word actually create effect? But to be able, the power or the strength in finally being able to voice something, like to not underestimate that, and to underestimate the potential that words have. And I mean, words is what we share. I mean, I found this in a notebook from a talk I hosted, I think again in 2012, where we just thought about, like, over the series of an hour and a half, to think about words that we shared as a group of people who came together. But
You often have lists. I also noticed when I looked at the notebooks, there are often lists, no?
In my notebooks.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite often, or I go through words a lot, like I was looking through, I think maybe in this one, I have just like a whole list of words ending in ship, like guardianship, ownership, fellowship, courtship, friendship, citizenship. But I just like making lists a lot. And I think actually in my songs quite often, it's just saying lists. Of things, but I'm interested in that linguistic element.
Brings us also back to the rafts, from the ships to the rafts. And I remember beautiful drawings in the notebooks of the rafts. We already touched upon it at the beginning a little bit. It may be interesting to talk a little bit more about the rafts, because that, of course, is connected to the Barking and Dagenham Commission. I mean, rafts are important in art history. Certainly one of the most famous rafts in painting is Géricault's Raft of Medusa, a painting which actually, when it was brought from France to the UK, triggered the States crisis. It's kind of fascinating, this idea that a painting can trigger a States crisis. And of course, now it's in France, in the museum there. And but it made this journey actually to England when Géricault was still alive. But for you, a raft is, as you told us, a fragile, or maybe the most fragile vehicle of survival at sea and on water. It's also a very ancient vehicle. Can you tell us a little bit about the rafts? It's very recurrent also in your drawings.
Yeah, just to connect it with language, I was fascinated. One theory linguistically is that that the humans started forming sentences at the same time they started to build rafts, and that the only way that humans were able to start these crossings between continents, or to first go eventually from Africa to Borneo, or the Indonesian islands, was through like that. There had to be a form of language at that point. And I think, like in the books, I'm often drawing these symbols of things being held, whether by a circle, and thinking. I've been working on this body of work which started last year, which was just trying to grasp where we're going, and trying to comprehend why now a specific generation has gained momentum and traction with the climate crisis, and why my own generation also didn't have it at the forefront. But I was reading this text by, I can never remember the name, but I think the text is called something like Manual for a Spaceship Earth, which is by R. Fuller. Yeah, it just gave this metaphor that the Earth itself as a life raft, as the most precarious thing which we have floating through space, that we're all on, and we don't really have anything else. Sorry, Elon Musk. So I just kept drawing the world in my books, and thinking of it as a life raft, and I suppose with the work with Barking and Dagenham, where sometimes before the images which I'm collecting in my sketchbooks have been more at the not so present, it felt the most kind of pertinent image to create a conversation about what it means to survive, what it means to be supported, to be kept afloat, and this is the main starting point, which we've been working with people, is just, what is this raft for you? What is, and also as a symbol which is is going from A to B. It's not a stationary thing, but it is going somewhere. So I've been building this, I suppose, iconography based on the project of Rafts, and I've happened to have landed on the page where like the main iconography of Rafts is situated. So there's like one of the rafts at the bottom of the page with a tree, which is a sail, and then there's a purse on the sail, which is another important part. There's rain at the top. It's got a start, like one of the main songs is at the moment, it's called Rodeo Music. And then the dam is another symbol. What holds this flow? Or we also had a poem by one of our participants called Give a Damn, Who Gives a Damn? To actually stop and hold something. So the dam is part of the raft universe, and as I'm working on the project, it's I'm kind of thinking about how, like, what is sonically building, but thinking of it as an ecosystem, how it's like building a sonic dam, I think I've written somewhere.
That last page just looks like a score, Rory.
This one?
The one before it.
Oh yeah, this is also just
But it's important what Amal just said, you know, in terms of the score, because that was another really amazing experience when you showed me the notebook for the first time in Barking, that I thought I was looking at drawings, and we looked at drawings and at notes and at lists and at words, and all of a sudden we were in the middle of a musical score. In a very fluid way. It sort of went from the drawing to the words into the musical score, and that's of course a really important aspect we maybe haven't touched upon yet so much in terms of your drawing, because you draw musical scores, but also in terms of your practice, because the sonic dimension is very important. So I'm very glad Amal brought that up, because I think it would be great to hear a little bit more about that from you.
Yeah, I mean, I love music. I've been playing I was very lucky to live in a house which had a piano, so I just started like playing piano and being a bit obsessed with just the act of playing music myself. And then I learned quite classically, but was also in pop bands. And I think music is just that transformative space, which is also maybe that threshold, and when words feel difficult, there's this feeling, at least they're transformed by music. So I think for me, like, we often talk about the frustration of just speaking, and what does that create? But I feel like with a song, it's that extra movement to this emotional realm. And yeah, so it's a lot of it is kind of thinking through music. So even thinking about, there it's the building of a sonic dam, and in other like spaces, I'm literally making scores. I don't know where they are now, but yeah, like trying to acquaint like a melody or a song lyric to just an image or a feeling.
It's so like we can see so many layers here, and I can almost, just because some of these words, maybe I relate to things that we've, you know, maybe moments in workshops we've been together, and it's so amazing to suddenly see it find its life in the page. But I was thinking a lot about music and the idea of the music video as well, because I feel like that's one of your mediums.
Yeah, or maybe is there time? I think I can. Is there time to maybe I'll share one of the music videos?
Could be a wonderful way of concluding is by looking at one of your clips. Yeah.
Okay, so this comes from the film The Undercurrent, And it's a singer who I found on SoundCloud, and she was 13 at the time. She's now 14, and I'm also hopefully working with her for Rafts, and we've been developing kind of songs through Zoom somehow. But this song comes from, like, I started writing it with another singer I worked with, Robin Haddon, and like, just, it's quite like, I always saw it as like a little country song at first, but I don't know if the country vibe maintained. But it ends on this this phrase of the towel of, and it just suddenly came, this image of like of the towel, and I was thinking, what on earth does that mean? But like, we often say you throw in the towel, and you give up, and what does it mean to bring a towel? So yeah, in this music video, I'd also been just thinking a lot about this idea of ecology, and of course that comes from the word the house. And through the film, these group of young people kind of build this conversation about their relationship with the climate crisis, but it's intersected with these moments of song which almost just appear out of nowhere, and this is one of them, called The Towel.
There's a hole in your heart, there's a hole in this incense, baby. There's a hole in your heart, there's a hole in this incense, baby, baby. It's so close you can feel it, catch fire when you breathe it, no way to escape it.
Oops.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh my, I'm very sorry. I think my internet did not cope with that.
Don't worry, I think mine's the same, but I would love to kind of listen to you all evening, but sadly we are going to have to bring this to a close just for time. But thank you so much, Hans Ulrich.
We do, however, have one, if we may, last question, because we cannot conclude it without my only recurrent question, which I always ask artists. And Amal and I really wanted to ask Rory this question. So if we may just have 2 more minutes, we'd be very grateful. And that's the question about the unrealized project, you see, because I think it's very interesting that we know a lot about architects' unrealized projects, but we know very little about artists' unrealized projects, because basically they're very rarely published. And I always think it's very interesting to conclude on the question of the unrealized project, not only to know about an artist's unrealized project, but maybe to also help then or enable this project to be realized. Now, it's fascinating, Rory, that you mentioned the operating manual for Spaceship Earth, because we almost went full circle, because we began, with the strike in Barking and Dagenham in 1968, and Buckminster Fuller, who is the author of the operating manual for Spaceship Earth, wrote that book actually a few months after the strike, in Barking and Dagenham. It came out in 1969. He wrote it in 68. And there is, of course, this chapter on Spaceship Earth, with the sun as an energy supplier. And Buckminster Fuller says, you know, we are all astronauts. So the idea of the Earth is a mechanical vehicle that requires maintenance. And if we don't do that, you know, then it will cease to function. So it's, of course, very relevant in terms of ecology, this whole book. And it's fascinating that you quoted it, but also Buckminster Fuller had a lot of utopic projects. He had unrealized projects. So I wanted to end really by asking you to tell us about one of your unrealized projects, the project which has been too big to be realized, a dream, many reasons why a project cannot be realized. Maybe it's also too small to be realized, or too expensive to be realized, or forgotten, or censored. There is also, of course, censorship. And then, as Doris Lessing always told me, another reason could be, Doris always said, you know, there are also the projects we haven't dared to do yet. They are unrealized. There's a wide range, but we won't have time to go into all of them, but it would be great to hear about one of your favorite unrealized projects.
Well, maybe actually the one is from the sketchbook with the boats. That never happened, or hasn't happened. But like, I was just thinking a lot about what it was to, I mean, that you'd have a performance or an event in which it was on two separate entities, but they also didn't know that the other one was there. So like how you try and make something happen and it gets so close. So like to be literally like a ship in the night. And I don't know what on earth is happening on those boats and what's going on. But that is definitely one unrealized project.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was worth, yeah, it was worth waiting for the last question. So thank you for that. And thank you all for joining us. It's been really fantastic to hear about your projects and your astrology. I love that. And Rory, thank you so much for sharing your sketchbooks in particular, and your sonic work, and really taking us through the different doorways that they open up. It's been really wonderful to hear about the Radio Ballads and to think more about different modes of creative collaboration, social engagement, and collective dreaming. And thank you, Hans-Ulrich, for bringing, for raising those ideas at the outset around the idea of the good ancestor and the slow programming, which we already admire, and which informs Back to Earth at the Serpentine. And I think that really resonates with the drawing school ethos and the thinking that we've been doing around the practice of slow drawing and thinking about drawing as a way of being attentive in and to the world. So drawing as the greenest art form. So once again, thank you, Rory, Amal, and Hans-Ulrich, for giving us inspiration for our collective dreaming, and thanks to all of you for listening. And we'll look forward to the public sharing of the Radio Ballads, I think next summer.
Yes, next summer.
Brilliant. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Amal. Thanks,
Thank
Al.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.